Today I'm going to be sewing the Experimental Space Hailey Shirt pattern using the blue dotty double gauze from August's classic boxes. Hello everyone, I hope you are doing really well. Welcome back to my channel. Today is a sewing day and I'm super excited to be using the blue denim coloured double gauze from August's classic SewHayleyJane boxes. I have ironed the double gauze before cutting the pattern pieces out. Double gauze is known for having a sort of crinkly texture to it, and people always ask, should I iron it or should I leave it? I think ironing it before, especially before cutting out your pattern pieces, is a really good idea, just to flatten the fabric out a little bit, but it does still retain the crinkly look. As you can see, it's a bit easier to see on the reverse. But everything is all cut out and ready to go. The gold dots, do not iron, if you're using this, do not iron on the gold dotty side. Make sure you iron on the reverse because the gold dots will melt under the iron. So always iron on reverse. And if you need to iron on the right side, use another piece of fabric on top just to, as like a protective layer. I am sewing the Experimental Space Hailey Shirt pattern, which is a pattern that went into our luxury boxes a few months ago. I dithered about which sleeve to do. We are in the middle of August. The heat wave that we had has come to an end and we are now experiencing lots of rain and thunderstorms. So I am now thinking more towards sewing ready for autumn. Can't quite believe I'm saying that, but there we are. So I did initially think I wanted to do the flutter sleeve. You can see it a bit easier on the reverse. There's 3 different sleeve options. You've got a 3/4 length, sleeveless, a frill sleeve and a flutter sleeve. I did think the flutter sleeve, but I think that might be better in a viscose fabric, maybe next spring. So instead I'm going for the 3/4 length. And it has a really lovely pleat detail across the front. Quite a large collar and yoke on the back and front as well, with buttons down the front. So I'm really excited. I cut the pattern out yesterday and I have had to grade quite a bit between my bust and hips. I really like with the Experimental Space patterns that she doesn't size her patterns in a number order, she sizes them with a name. So I am size Faye at the bust. And actually I go all the way down to a Mia at the hips, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 size differences. So I've actually used the finished measurements to help decide what pattern to cut because it's a very loose shirt. And actually if I just grade 4 sizes between the bust and the hips, I think that's going to give me enough room at the hips. So that's what I've done. It's still quite a big difference. But I actually messaged Andrea. She's really great. If ever you sew an Experimental Space pattern and need some help, Andrea is really happy to be on hand to answer any questions over your email. So I did send her a message and she said it will be absolutely fine as long as you make sure that the sleeves and collar are all along with your bust measurement, and then everything from underneath your bust can be extended. So time to get sewing. The first things to do are stay stitching around the necklines and then adding the darts. One other thing that I really like about this pattern is you've got the bust darts that you add, but there are options to add front and back darts once you've finished sewing because they're in the bodice rather than on the side seams. So you can add them after, which I really like. So I'm going to sew it up, see how it feels. And if there feels like there's too much fabric, especially in the back, I can add some darts afterwards, which is really handy. So stay stitching and side bust darts first. Okay, so now we have attached the yoke to the front bodice. We need to create this really lovely pleat detail here that just highlights that seam line. So I've done it on this side, now I'm going to do it on this side. So pop that over to one side. On the pattern piece, you can see that we've got some notches to show us where to fold. You've got the fold line in the middle, this seam line where we attached the yoke to the bodice, and then the notch where we're going to attach, when we're going to press the seam line towards. It makes more sense when we do it. So to do that, we need to fold the yoke towards the back, matching that top notch with the original seam line at both ends, and making sure that this pleat is exactly 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch all the way along. Press it using a pressing cloth if you are using a similar fabric that has the gold dot, because you don't want to melt it. And then we're going to sew along the original seam line. So we're going to stitch in the ditch. It doesn't have to be perfect because the pleat will then be folded down, so you won't actually see that original seam line anyway. Okay, so now we're going to attach the button band to both front pieces. We're going to start off with the right side as worn, and this button band has a strip of interfacing. It doesn't need to be one long continuous strip of interfacing. You can use your little odds and ends and scraps to try and use it up. But we're pinning the right side of the button band to the wrong side of the front piece. Sew along that raw edge. Then we're going to fold in the raw edge of the button band, fold the button band in half, fold it all the right way round and sew it down. So it's a fairly standard button band construction. Okay, so we've sewn the button band onto the bodice, but to reduce some of the bulk in the seam allowance before we do all the pressing, we're just going to reduce the seam allowance of the button band only by half. So keeping the seam allowance of the front bodice out of the way, just trim the seam allowance of the button band. And then we're going to fold that over and press, making sure the seam allowances are being pressed towards the button band and not the bodice. Now we are going to sew the button band down. We're going to top stitch it down, and I'm going to switch out the usual sewing machine foot for an edge stitch foot. Now an edge stitch foot has this blade that you run along the seam line that you want to sew next to. So we're going to put the folded edge of the button band pressed right up against this blade, and we're going to reduce the stitch length to 0 and sew along using that. So we've attached the edge stitch foot, and we're going to reduce the stitch width to 0, like so. And then we're going to put the fabric in to the sewing machine. And the edge, the folded edge, is going to be pressed right up against that black blade there to keep a nice straight edge. Okay, so we have just taken a little break for lunch, and now we're going to crack on with sewing. The first thing is to sew the back yoke piece to the front yoke pieces to sew the shoulder seams. Now in the instructions, they recommend to either use French seams or flat felled seams to finish your seams, but I am going to take the lazy approach and I'm going to use my overlocker because yeah, I'm a bit lazy like that. So I'm going to sew the shoulder seams with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and then overlock and press And then it's onto the collar, which is definitely going to be the fiddliest bit of this whole construction. But once the collar's done, the rest is pretty simple. So let's crack on. Here's a little tip for you. If you need a little extra help sewing a straight seam line, use a piece of washi tape and tape it to the plate on your sewing machine at the seam allowance that you want to follow. So in this instance, we're using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I've put the washi tape there, and it's just a little bit easier to follow this straight line sometimes. Let's give it a go. So now we're going to sew the collar pieces, and to start we're going to sew the collar leaf pieces, which we have here. So these are the bit with the pointed collar edge. Now before I started sewing, the first instruction was to trim the under collar down just a fraction, and that is so that when we roll it to the right side out, that seam line will be slightly hidden. It will roll slightly underneath the collar so that you shouldn't see the seam line. So to start off with, we're going to sew and actually attach, make those pieces stretch so that they fit. And we're going to sew the two short edges and one long edge. This edge here that has the notches is going to be left unsewn. So I have pinned the collar stand to the bodice, making sure to leave a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch overhang of the collar stand from the button band, which is this bit underneath here. You have to stretch the collar stand a little bit as you pin it, so you can see that we've got this bit here sort of lifts up because it's stretching, but that will all lie flat afterwards. So now I'm going to sew that with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to sew the main collar onto the collar stand. So I have basted the collar onto the collar stand, matching the edge of the collar to the notch on the collar stand here, and just basted that in place. And then with the other collar stand, I have folded the straight edge up by 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to sandwich the collar in between the two collar stands, matching up the notches and the edges. And then I'm going to sew it all the way along the curved edge with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure to sew close to the button band edge, but not onto the button band edge. So just a few millimeters over the edge of the button band. The collar is all attached now, and I have top stitched around the collar stand. I was supposed to top stitch the collar as well, but I accidentally missed that piece out. But I'm not gonna worry too much about that. When I top stitched the collar stand down, I have missed a few places on the inside. So I am just going to hand stitch those down later on this evening. So onto the final sort of easier construction pieces. We have to attach the back bodice piece to the back yoke pieces, sew the side seams together, sew the sleeve seams, insert the sleeves, and those bits are fairly straightforward compared to collars and button bands. So fingers crossed we're not going to take too much longer now. The basic construction of the shirt is now done. It is starting to look like an actual shirt. We have the side seams sewn up and overlocked. I just need to give those a press in a minute. But now it's time to insert the sleeves. So with sleeves, once you've inserted sleeves a few times, you tend to find the way that you like to do it. Different designers tell you to do it different ways in terms of basting. Some people say to do 1 line of basting stitches, some 2, some 3. I favour 2 lines of basting stitches, 1 at 2 centimetres and 1 at 1 centimetre. And then the stitching line goes in between at 1.5 centimetres. So turn your sleeve right side out. We have already sewn and overlocked the sleeve seams. And then you need to find which sleeve needs to go in which sleeve hole by matching up the notches. So the front of sleeves always have 1 notch and the back of the sleeve always has 2 notches, and that matches up with the armhole that you attach it to. Okay, time to do the buttonholes, which is quite often one of the scariest bits, but I have done a little tester piece because of the double gauze and the gold dots. I was a little bit nervous, but it's come out okay. I'm using these tiny little mother of pearl Though I think they've got a different name now. I think Mother of Pearl isn't the official name. But they're Mother of Pearl buttons that we had in the boxes about a year ago, I think. So probably the tiniest buttonholes I have ever sewn. So I'm a bit scared about opening them up, but they'll be fine. They'll be fine. So the instructions say to mark your first buttonhole 2 centimeters down from the collar, and then every other one 6 centimeters apart all the way down. So this, it will be the top edge of the buttonhole, and then the bottom edge will be over here somewhere. So this Janome machine comes with a 1-step buttonhole attachment. Most modern machines these days do have a 1-step buttonhole attachment, and you put the button in the back, and that gives you the length of the buttonhole. I've set it to a standard buttonhole stitch. Now the trickiest bit is getting this fabric underneath and lining up the starting point, which is where the pin is. Pop the presser foot down, take the pin out, press go and hope for the best. Are we ready? So once I've got these buttonholes sewn, I am heading home for the night, and I will be sewing the buttons on this evening in front of some TV, and then I can show you the finishing touches tomorrow. Okay, it is day 2 of sewing. I have actually done a little bit of off-camera sewing, but it's nearly done and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I did a try on and decided to add the double end darts at the back and on the front bodice pieces as well. So the shape looks really gorgeous now. I'm really happy with that. With the hemming, because this fabric was actually quite tricky to iron because of the gold dots, and the iron does melt the dots, I didn't want to do a double fold hem to try and avoid the amount of ironing that I was using. So instead I overlocked the edges and then just folded it up once. So if you're going to use this fabric, do consider how much pressing you're going to need to do. This maybe, even though I'm really happy with how it's turned out and it was worth it, maybe wasn't the easiest thing to make because of all the pressing that needed doing on the collar and the button bands. But with the help of just a fat quarter, a pressing cloth, a plain piece of cotton, we're okay. We've only melted a couple of the dots. So I'm really happy with how it's turning out. Now I'm just going to do the last button and open the last buttonhole, and then I will put it on and show you the final piece. Buttonholes. The double gauze struggled a little bit to sew the buttonholes, and I had to unpick 1 or 2. So the ones that I had to unpick, I've just placed a little strip of interfacing on the back of the button band, and it went through much easier this time. So double gauze and buttonholes, not necessarily the best of friends, but we got there and it's worked out fine. So we're just going to open up this last one. I'm using this chisel. It's a buttonhole opening chisel from Clover, and I really love it, but you do have to give it a bit of force. So we just pop it inside the buttonhole, try and making sure that you're not going to catch any of the actual sewing. Press down hard and you'll feel it kind of go through. There it is. And then it's opened up. So to sew your buttonholes on, first you need to lay the button band that's going to have the buttons on the front. We'll ignore the fact I've already done these ones. Then you lay the button band with the holes on top, lining up your hem and any other bits that need lining up, like the pleat there. Then take a pin, place the pin in the middle of the buttonhole and lift the buttonhole up so that you can see where the pin's going to go, and then just bring your pin out and pop in like so. Oh, sorry. Then thread up your needle. I like to double up my thread across the needle and pull it all the way along, so it's a double layer of thread all the way down. Turn your button band over so that you start working from the back, and I tend to start, instead of making a knot in a button band, I will bring the needle up inside the button band to where I want it, so that the loose thread is tucked away inside the button band. So making sure that the needle's not going through to the right side. Pull that through until you're just losing the thread on the inside, and then do a couple of stitches, making sure that you're hitting where the pin is, and then you can take the pin out. Don't put it away because you're going to need it again in a minute. And just do a couple of little stitches. Then take your button and place the needle through one of your buttonholes, pull it all the way through, then push the needle back through the other hole. But before you pull the thread all the way through, take your needle again, your pin again, and place it underneath the button, and this just creates a little gap to help with when you're closing up the shirt, that the button isn't too tight against the fabric. When you reach your final stitch, you can remove the pin, don't need that anymore. Push the needle through to the back, and then create a little knot by feeding the needle through the stitches that you've made, and then feed the needle back through this loop here, and that creates a little knot. And then to finish off, I'm going to finish the same way that I started by putting the needle back inside the button band so that the loose threads are tucked away inside. Finished, and I am so happy with how it's turned out. I absolutely love it. I love the pleat detail. I love that there was the option to add some darts in the back and front of the bodice. I think it just gives it a little extra shape, which is lovely. I think I probably could have gotten away with grading just between 2 or 3 sizes, because there is quite a lot of room at the hips still. So next time I'll probably soften that grade a little bit. But I absolutely love sewing this up. I love how the collar looks. I love that it's quite big and kind of floppy as well. I think it looks really sort of soft and gentle as opposed to quite a stiff collar. Obviously that very much depends on the fabric that you use. If you use a cotton poplin or cotton lawn, then it'll be a little bit stiffer. But with this double gauze, I think it looks lovely and soft and gentle. So I really love it. Thank you so much everyone for watching. Let me know if you are using this fabric and what you're going to do with it, or let me know if you think you might have a go at sewing the Hailey shirt as well. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, Subscribe if you don't already, and I will see you all really soon for another video. Bye.